You know, if you've ever tried to clear a truly overgrown patch of land, there is this moment of just um, profound, almost existential frustration,
Oh, absolutely.
right? Like, you go out there on a Saturday morning with your shears and a machete, you hack through the thicket, you pull down the creeping vines, you mow the surface completely down to the dirt, your hands are blistered, your back is aching. But as the sun sets, you look out over that plot of land and it looks perfectly clear.
Yeah, you feel this massive sense of triumph.
Exactly. You feel like, hey, I solved the problem, but beneath the soil, completely out of sight, the root network is just entirely untouched.
It's still completely alive.
Right. It's still pulsing with nutrients.
Yeah.
And most importantly, it is mechanically programmed to regenerate exactly what you just spent 12 hours destroying. So you wait a week, maybe there's a heavy rain, and suddenly the green shoots are back.
The thorns push right back through the soil.
Exactly as they were. You didn't solve the problem at all. You just, you gave the problem a haircut.
Yeah, because the surface action, the hacking, the cutting, the burning of the topsoil, it doesn't fundamentally alter the underlying machinery. The visible branch, the part that actually cuts you, is entirely a product of that invisible root.
Mm-hmm.
When you're standing in that field, you aren't just fighting a static object. You are fighting a generative system, a system that is explicitly designed to outlast your sheer physical effort.
We gave the problem a haircut. That is such a wild way to think about it. Today, we are looking at a brilliant and honestly deeply unsettling essay that argues human history is essentially a graveyard of societies that just gave their problems a haircut.
Right, mostly because they had absolutely no idea how to pull up the root without, destroying themselves in the process.
Exactly. So, welcome to another deep dive. We're exploring the core concepts from an essay titled The Root and the Blade, Understanding Divine Judgment and Continuity. And our mission today, as we sit here with you, the listener, is to really pull apart the mechanics of historical survival.
It's a heavy one.
It really is. We are going to look at the hard, unforgiving physical limits of human capacity.
Yeah.
How societies actually metabolize threats, how they integrate outsiders, and what happens when the infrastructure of a civilization just fundamentally collapses inward.
Yeah.
We're stripping away all our modern emotional assumptions and looking purely at the structural engineering of human continuity.
And it is a massive undertaking. To build this architecture, we really have to start at the absolute foundation. We have to start with etymology.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're starting with the mechanical history of a single, incredibly heavy word, right?
Right. Genocide.
Yeah.
Now, the moment that word enters a room, it brings a paralyzing emotional and historical weight, and for very obvious and necessary reasons.
Of course.
But to grasp the mechanics of societal survival, the essay argues we have to pause and dissect the root structure of the word itself, completely separate from the international legal frameworks that were, constructed around it in the 20th century.
So let's actually isolate those pieces. The suffix, sufficicide, is straightforward. It comes from the Latin for cutting down, killing, or destroying. We use it all the time. Homicide is the killing of a human.
Mm-hmm.
Pesticide is the killing of a pest. Herbicide is the destruction of a plant. It denotes the mechanical action of termination. But the first half of the word genos, or genus, is where the entire architecture of this concept lives.
Yes.
Because when we talk about a genos, we aren't just talking about a loose collection of individuals who happen to be standing in the same room. The root defines a kind, a stock, a tribe, a birth body.
A family or a class, yeah.
Right. And the most vital phrase we can use to translate this concept today is a corporate order, or a generative continuity.
Generative continuity. That phrase is the engine that drives everything we are going to discuss today.
What does that actually look like in practice?
Well, a generative continuity is a system that possesses the inherent blueprints, the cultural DNA, and the mechanical apparatus to reproduce itself. It has a continuous regenerative life cycle. Think of a massive oak tree.
Mm-hmm.
The tree isn't just the wood currently standing above ground. It's the acorns, the root system, the fungal network feeding it, and the genetic programming that ensures another oak will grow if the current one falls.
Right. So if we look at the absolute baseline, stripped of all modern legal context, the word purely describes the destruction of a genos. It is the destruction of a generative body.
Exactly.
It's the act of pulling up the entire root system so that the organism can never reproduce itself again. It's not just pruning the branches, it is salting the earth.
And here's where we reach the first major philosophical pivot in the text. This root definition only identifies the category of the action. It tells us structurally what is happening in the physical world.
But it doesn't...
Right, it doesn't automatically answer the moral question of whether that action is justified. The act of pulling up a root is a mechanically neutral action until you identify what that root is genetically programmed to grow.
Oh, that makes perfect sense in agriculture. I mean, if you pull up a tomato plant by the roots, you are destroying a generative continuity that provides food. But if you pull up nightshade or poison ivy by the roots, you are destroying a generative continuity that produces poison.
Yes.
The mechanical action of pulling is identical. The moral weight of the action is entirely dependent on the nature of the plant.
Exactly. The moral question hinges on what kind of genus is being destroyed, by what authority, and under what conditions. If a powerful force targets an innocent bloodline, if the target is a group of children, a specific ethnic identity, or personhood simply for existing, then that destruction is the purest definition of profound historical evil.
Which is the evil of those 20th century legal definitions were built to prosecute.
Precisely. But the architecture of this essay forces us to stare at the dark alternative. What if the target is not an innocent bloodline? What if the genus in question is a guilty corporate death order?
A death order. Okay, we have to ground this in reality for the listener.
We do. Imagine a generative apparatus that literally reproduces death and suffering through its own continuity. Think of a deeply entrenched mafia family or a massive cartel.
Right.
The cartel isn't just a group of individuals who happen to be doing bad things. It is a structured, generative continuity. It has recruitment mechanisms. It has initiation rites. It has a financial apparatus. And it passes its brutal culture down to the next generation of foot soldiers.
So if you just arrest 5 guys on the street corner,
If you just cut the branch.
a cartel immediately regenerates.
Yes, it promotes new lieutenants. It recruits new teenagers. The death order continues.
Man, and that raises an incredibly uncomfortable question. If a corporate order is structurally designed to reproduce violence, exploitation, or, in the case of some ancient empires, institutionalized child sacrifice, does destroying its generative continuity carry the same moral weight as destroying an innocent one?
Structurally, the word itself doesn't make that distinction. It simply describes the termination of a regenerative line.
Well, here's where it gets really interesting. If you are dealing with a system that reproduces itself to the active detriment of its surrounding environment, you are fundamentally talking about biology.
You are.
And this brings us to one of the most structurally fascinating analogies I've ever encountered. To explain how a corporate death order functions within a larger society, the author says we have to look at the mechanics of cancer.
Biology offers a pristine lens here because it removes human ideology and political bias. We can observe the dynamics of survival, continuity, and destruction at a cellular level without our modern sensitivities clouding the mechanics.
And the fundamental misunderstanding most people have about cancer is that they view it as an invader, right? We think of it like a splinter or a bacterial infection or a virus that enters from the outside and attacks us.
Yeah, that's how we usually talk about it.
But cancer is none of those things. A cancer cell is human cellular life. It is your own body's life, but it is life that has gone fundamentally structurally astray.
It is. At a microscopic level, a cancer cell is not a dead, inert thing. It is vibrantly alive. And more importantly, it has a point of view.
A point of view.
It has objectives. A cancer cell actively seeks survival. It seeks replication. It builds its own blood vessels to capture nutrients from the host. It develops sophisticated mechanisms to actively evade the body's immune system. It wants to grow, and it is incredibly good at it.
It's doing exactly what life is programmed to do. It wants to multiply.
Right. But the defining characteristic of this specific life is that it operates as self-data misgoverned. Healthy human cells operate under a strict biological covenant. They communicate.
Okay.
When a healthy cell detects that it is damaged or that it has replicated too many times, it triggers a process called apoptosis. It's a programmed cellular suicide switch. The cell realizes it is no longer serving the order of the whole body, and it peacefully dismantles itself so the body can survive.
Wow. And a cancer cell just ignores that.
A cancer cell has broken that covenant entirely. It ignores the signal for apoptosis. It silences the communication pathways. It decides that its own local survival, its own local replication, is vastly more important than the survival of the macroorganism. It is a local life order that has become profoundly disordered against the larger life order of the human body.
The part has life, but the whole has order. That phrase really stuck with me. The cell is biologically alive, but the human body requires a complex, integrated order to remain alive. When the part elevates its own life above the order of the whole, The whole body is threatened with systemic collapse.
And this introduces the concept of the maturity hinge, which is essential for understanding how we judge generative continuity. A cancer cell has a fixed trajectory. It is programmed to multiply until the host is consumed.
Let's break down this maturity hinge. Imagine a radiologist looking at a scan and finding a tiny microscopic cluster of brand new early-stage cancer cells. Those specific cells haven't actually harmed the patient yet, have they?
Not yet, no.
They haven't caused a tumor to press against an organ. They haven't caused systemic failure. They are essentially immature cancer cells. They are baby cells.
But an oncologist doesn't look at a cluster of immature cancer cells and say, well, these cells haven't actually done anything wrong yet. They haven't caused any organ damage. Let's just leave them alone and hope they decide to be benign later.
No, of course not.
Because the danger of those cells is not based on conscious adult deliberation. The danger is inherently tied to the generative order they belong to.
Their trajectory is fixed.
Yeah.
Immaturity does not erase trajectory. You don't ask a baby cancer cell to sign a peace treaty because it is structurally programmed to reproduce a future that will kill the host. The seed contains the absolute blueprint of the mature destructive organism.
Exactly.
Okay, but I have to stop you right here because we are approaching an incredibly dangerous cliff. Comparing a group of human beings to a tumor, or comparing an opposing culture to a cancer cell that is the exact, literal, rhetorical playbook of every genocidal dictator in the 20th century.
Yes, it is.
But calling a minority population a cancer on the nation is how eugenics starts. It is how atrocities are justified. How do we even engage with this biological metaphor without crossing the line into historical evil?
That pushback is absolutely vital. And it is the exact boundary line that separates a mechanical understanding of systems from the evils of eugenics. The biological analogy is strictly for understanding the mechanics of generative continuity, how systems reproduce.
Okay.
It completely collapses if you try to use it as an authorization for human extermination. And the reason it collapses is based on the fundamental definition of what a human being actually is. Humans are not merely biological cells blindly executing a genetic script.
Right, because a cancer cell has no agency.
No.
It cannot choose to be a healthy lung cell. It cannot be negotiated with, it cannot be taught, and it cannot change its mind. Its trajectory is permanently fixed by its mutated DNA. But a human child born into a hostile, violent corporate order, let's say a child born into that mafia family we talked about, is not morally identical to the structure they were born into.
Exactly the opposite. Humans possess profound neuroplasticity. We possess agency, intellect, and the capacity for moral reasoning. The trajectory of a human being is not biologically fixed. A human child can be taught a new language, they can be exposed to a new moral framework, they can be adopted physically and culturally removed from their toxic origins, healed, reformed, and fully integrated into a completely different healthy covenant order.
If you take a child out of the mafia family at age 2 and they are raised by a loving, law-abiding family in a different country, they do not spontaneously start extorting local businesses when they turn 18.
Right.
Their continuity was cultural, not biological. They can be separated from the poison.
Which means the cancer analogy proves that systems naturally reproduce their own kind, but it utterly fails as a justification for destroying human beings. Because unlike a cancer cell, a human being can be saved.
Wow.
A human being can be separated from the death order. And this capacity for separation is the hinge upon which all of human history and morality swings.
Okay, so this brings us to a massive, glaring historical paradox. If human beings possess agency, if a child can be adopted, if a defeated population can be integrated and separated from a hostile death order, why is ancient history an absolute slaughterhouse?
It's a great question.
If mercy and integration are physically possible, why does the ancient historical record read like an endless litany of total catastrophic annihilation? Why didn't victorious armies just integrate the defeated populations?
To answer that, we have to step into the military academic layer of the essay, and we have to confront our own deeply ingrained arrogance.
Verdict is.
Yeah. We look at ancient history through the unearned luxury of modern infrastructure. We judge Bronze Age kings and Iron Age generals by projecting our modern capabilities backward in time, assuming they had the same tools we have, but just chose not to use them out of sheer savagery.
Oh, I see. Let's actually talk about what those modern tools are, because when we say infrastructure, we usually think of highways, bridges, and power grids. But the deeper, invisible infrastructure of a society is its bureaucratic and social nervous system.
Right.
Today, if a society takes in a massive influx of refugees or integrates a defeated population, What tools do we assume are just naturally present?
Well, we assume the existence of mass public schooling. We assume pediatric psychology and trauma counseling. We rely on extensive paper trails, digital records, standardized citizenship laws, formal adoption courts, complex social services, language translation apps, international human rights norms, stable civilian bureaucracies, and literal state-funded de-radicalization programs.
We view all of that as the baseline of human civilization. We just think that's how the world is.
Exactly.
But historically speaking, that web of conceptual and bureaucratic infrastructure is incredibly recent. It requires immense wealth, immense energy, and a highly stable political environment to maintain.
Let's place ourselves in the reality of the ancient world. It's not that ancient peoples were mindless barbarians who couldn't conceptualize peace. They understood diplomacy. They had localized treaties. They practiced elite marriage alliances to bind kingdoms together. They had forms of hostage exchange to ensure good behavior, and they had limited forms of household adoption.
But they absolutely lacked the ability to do any of this at scale.
Right.
Their infrastructure for integration was hyperlocal. It depended on the personal wealth of a specific ruler or the capacity of a specific aristocratic household. They did not have the mass-scale, rights-based communication integrated apparatus necessary to metabolize a large hostile population.
Consider the logistical nightmare of ancient conquest. Imagine you are a victorious general. You have just defeated a neighboring empire. This isn't just a friendly rival. This is a hostile corporate order that has been launching brutal existential raids against your people for 5 generations.
Okay, then let's see.
Perhaps their entire culture is built on an oath-bound system of eternal blood revenge. Their priesthood demands constant war.
A true generative continuity of violence.
Yes. Now, the battle is over, and you stand at the gates of their capital. You decide to be modern. You decide to be merciful. You spare the defeated kingdom's royal heirs, their elite military families, and their duckly entrenched priesthood. You absorb them into your own city. You bring them behind your walls. Modern sensibilities applaud this. We say, that is the humane, civilized thing to do.
But let's look at the actual physics of that decision in the ancient world.
Yeah.
Sparing the elites of a hostile continuity wasn't safe mercy. It was practically signing your own death warrant.
Absolutely.
Why? Because you have no bureaucratic infrastructure to monitor them. You bring a hostile priesthood inside your walls, but you have no mass schooling to re-educate their children. You have no digital surveillance to track subversion. You have no social workers to ensure they are integrating.
You have given them input, but you have not achieved integration. And because you cannot metabolize them, the defeated Genos simply uses your city as a greenhouse. The root was brought inside, planted in your soil, and it regenerates. Within a generation, those spared royal heirs and displaced priests orchestrate a massive internal rebellion, open the city gates to foreign allies, and slaughter your entire population in their sleep.
This forces us to realize something incredibly dark about ancient warfare. It wasn't necessarily that every single child or civilian in that conquered city was individually guilty of a crime.
Not at all. It was that the victorious ancient system lacked the metabolic capacity to separate those individuals from the hostile continuity at scale. If you cannot separate the person from the poison, and the poison is determined to kill you, your options are brutally binary.
This leads to what might be the most profound mechanical synthesis of this entire discussion. Input is not integration. Permission is not capacity. Mercy requires infrastructure.
Mercy requires infrastructure. We desperately want to believe that mercy is just an emotion. We think that if our hearts are in the right place, if we feel empathy and declare our intentions to be kind, that the physical world will magically align to make it work. But mercy is not a feeling. Mercy is a grueling, resource-intensive logistical engineering problem.
It's like trying to run a massive, modern software update, say, a cutting-edge artificial intelligence program, on a desktop computer from 1995.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
The intentions are good. The software code itself might be beautifully written and deeply beneficial. But the hardware simply does not have the processing power, the memory, or the architecture to run it. If you force the input, you don't upgrade the computer, you fry the motherboard. The system crashes.
And the ancient world simply did not have the motherboard for mass mercy. If you permit a hostile or radically different population to enter your society, if you give them permission on a piece of paper, but you lack the logistical, educational, and economic infrastructure to actually metabolize that influx, you aren't achieving mercy.
You're setting the stage for a catastrophic metabolic collapse.
Yes, and when the host body collapses, it doesn't just destroy the native population, it destroys the incoming people as well, because the very system they relied upon for survival has disintegrated.
But this infrastructure problem didn't just magically vanish because we invented the internet and digital databases. The laws of societal metabolism still apply. And if metabolism is a hard physical limit, what happens when we look at the sheer speed and volume of global movement today?
Right, so we have to apply this exact mechanical lens to modern throughput, specifically immigration. And I want to be very clear here, to do this properly, we have to completely remove the emotional and political rhetoric that usually surrounds this topic. We aren't looking at this through the lens of modern political parties, culture wars, or ideological debates. We are explicitly, objectively exploring the mechanical argument presented in the text.
Exactly. We're taking no sides. We are analyzing the physics of societal metabolism. Let's frame this structurally. Imagine a healthy, well-functioning human digestive system. You sit down to a beautiful, organic, perfectly cooked 5-course meal. The food is legal, it is healthy, and your body needs nutrients.
Sounds great so far.
But if you attempt to force feed all 50 pounds of that food into your stomach in 10 minutes, your body will violently reject it. It doesn't matter how high quality the food is. Your stomach has a hard physical metabolic limit. It can only produce so much stomach acid. It can only extract nutrients at a specific speed. If you exceed the rate of metabolism, the system breaks.
The exact same mechanical principle applies to a body politic receiving an influx of new people. Let's look at how the concept of legal entry functions within this metabolic framework. When a government grants a legal stamp of approval for 1 million people to enter a country, that legal status is essentially just a philosophical declaration. It answers one question: was entry permitted by the law?
But permission is not capacity. A stamp on a passport does not magically manifest physical resources out of thin air.
Precisely. The legal permission does not automatically guarantee that there are enough available housing units. It doesn't magically spawn 1,000 new ESL teachers in the local school districts. It doesn't instantly build new courtrooms to handle disputes or expand the local tax base fast enough to upgrade the sewage and water treatment plants.
Let's ground this in a specific, tangible example for you listening. Imagine a small town of 5,000 people. They have a functioning ecosystem.
Yeah.
The local school has a certain budget. The hospital has 20 beds. The local court handles 3 cases a week. Suddenly, over the course of 3 months, 2,000 new residents arrive.
Okay.
It doesn't matter if they are legal or illegal. The local elementary school principal now has 400 new students who don't speak the primary language, but her budget hasn't increased and she can't hire translators. The hospital waiting room is suddenly a 14-hour wait because there aren't enough triage nurses. The local housing market skyrockets because demand vastly outpaces supply, displacing the poorest native residents.
What you are describing is a cascade failure of local infrastructure. The throughput has exceeded the metabolic capacity of the system. The host body is failing to digest the input. And when we look at the distinction between legal and illegal entry mechanically, a legal entry adds an entirely separate layer of structural strain.
How so?
Because a society builds specific infrastructural pathways, health checks, background screenings, documentation, slow integration pipelines specifically designed to pace the input so that society can digest it safely.
Ah, I see. Illegal entry is essentially bypassing the digestive tract entirely. It goes around the very infrastructure designed to protect both the host and the arrival. It forces the system to react blindly, scrambling resources after the fact, which accelerates the metabolic breakdown.
But the core realization here is that even perfectly lawful, highly documented, well-intentioned inflow can still overwhelm a society if the raw numerical volume and the speed of the arrival exceed the physical limits of the local infrastructure.
The beauty of viewing throughput as a metabolic problem is that it completely changes the nature of the conversation. When infrastructure buckles, people get frustrated. But that frustration is almost always misinterpreted. The structural argument is that this breakdown is not rooted in xenophobia. It is not about a hatred of the stranger.
No, it's a terrifying realization that the body politic cannot metabolize the incoming persons without dissolving its own order. It is the panic of a system that feels itself exceeding its physical limits. We are fundamentally constrained by our infrastructure. The capacity to integrate is not infinite. And this hard limit on human capacity, our inability to perfectly know, separate, and integrate every single person, is the vital bridge that allows us to understand the essay's most provocative and difficult argument.
Which is the mechanics of divine judgment.
Right. What's fascinating here is that if our human capacity to integrate is physically limited, What do we do with a hostile continuity we absolutely cannot metabolize?
If we are Bronze Age generals, we resort to total destruction for sheer survival.
But the essay draws a massive, impenetrable wall between the brutal, terrified military logic of human beings and the concept of righteous, divine judgment in biblical texts. The claim the author makes is incredibly specific and carefully bounded. The argument is that biblical genos ride, the absolute destruction of a corporate order, can be morally righteous, but only under the condition of perfect divine omniscience.
Let's make sure we define what is not being said here. The author is absolutely not providing a blank check for human violence. When they say biblical destruction is righteous, they are not talking about humans inventing extermination theology. They are not justifying race.
Destruction of a genos is framed as righteous only when it is a direct judicial act of God. Think of the destruction of Sodom. It wasn't Abraham forming a local militia because he didn't like the cultural practices of his neighbors and deciding to wipe them out. The judgments against specific Canaanite corporate orders were not instances of an ancient army just deciding to hate and conquer whoever they wanted for political convenience.
So why is the divine act considered righteous, while the human imitation of it is considered an atrocity? It all comes down to the garden metaphor we started with. It is about knowledge and capacity. You and I are fundamentally blind gardeners. We can look at a field, we can look at the surface leaves, and we can make an educated guess about which plant is crop and which plant is weed.
But we cannot see the root system.
Exactly. We do not know for sure what the seed will produce in 5 generations.
We lack omniscience. We are blind to the true ultimate trajectory of any human life or corporate order. But God, as the creator of the system itself, possesses perfect knowledge. God perfectly knows the root, the branch, the invisible fungal network, the guilt, the exact trajectory, and the future continuity. God alone knows with absolute, flawless certainty whether a specific corporate order can be healed, separated, and integrated, or if it has crossed a terminal threshold where it is entirely, irreversibly given over to reproducing death.
Because God has infinite capacity and perfect knowledge, God is the only entity that can pull the root without lying about what the seed would have eventually produced. Human beings do not have that omniscience. We do not have the capacity to see the soul, the seed, or the trajectory perfectly.
And this limitation leads to the most haunting indictment of human history in the entire essay. If God judges a generative continuity, it is a righteous act based on perfect truth. But if a human being attempts to imitate that total judgment, if a human declares an entire group of people inherently irredeemable without direct, undeniable divine command and perfect knowledge, it is a profound usurpation of the divine role.
The phrase the author uses here is chilling. When humans attempt to play the omniscient judge, it is not righteous warfare. It is murder-wearing stolen theology.
Murder-wearing stolen theology. I mean, throughout history, when human empires lacked the infrastructure, the patience, or the moral will to integrate a different population, they didn't want to admit their own weakness or prejudice. So they stole the robes of the divine judge. They declared the innocent population to be a cancer, a poison, or demonic. They falsely labeled innocent life as an irredeemable death order to justify their own atrocities.
We steal the theology of omniscience to cover for our lack of capacity and our abundance of fear.
Yeah.
We simply don't have the clearance level to make that call. Our job, constrained by our blindness and our limited infrastructure, is to build as much capacity as possible to separate the person from the poison, to adopt, to integrate, and to heal.
But what happens when a society abandons that mission entirely? What happens when a corporate order stops trying to build infrastructure, stops trying to generate life, and completely collapses inward upon itself?
To illustrate the ultimate end state of a societal collapse, the essay turns to a visceral, horrifying biblical image. It looks at the curse of a society devouring its own children.
We need to tread carefully here, because the imagery is incredibly dark, but it serves as the ultimate diagnostic tool for a dying society. In biblical siege narratives, the ultimate horror is the physical cannibalization of children by their own parents. But the author clarifies that God is not commanding this as a twisted form of punishment.
No, it's presented as the terrifying natural consequence of a covenant completely collapsing. God is essentially saying, if you build a societal architecture completely dedicated to death, eventually the walls will close in, your resources will vanish, and you will be handed over to the physical reality of the death order you created. The physical act of eating flesh during a siege is just the visible endpoint of a spiritual reality that was already happening.
And this brings the ancient terror directly into our modern world. We don't live under ancient siege conditions. We don't face literal cannibalism. But the essay argues that the literal horror of eating flesh is just the extreme physical manifestation of a much wider mechanical principle. You don't have to boil a child to devour them. You devour a child by consuming their future to feed your present.
The present eats the future. That is the definition of a collapsed order.
Right.
So what does this all mean? How do we devour children today? We sacrifice their psychological well-being to our political ideologies. We consume their innocence to feed global digital lust and predatory algorithms. We mortgage their economic future to sustain our current standard of living. We consume them through parental ego, using their achievements to soothe our own insecurities.
I want to focus heavily on one specific, brilliant example the author uses because it perfectly illustrates how a death order can masquerade as love. The author identifies helicopter parenting as a modern form of devouring the future.
When I first read that, it felt like a massive leap. How is being overly involved in your kid's life structurally similar to devouring them?
Mechanically, it fits perfectly. Think about the psychology of a deeply anxious, hovering parent. The parent is terrified of the world, terrified of failure, and desperate to control the outcome of the child's life. So what do? The child has a science project due. The child is struggling. Instead of letting the child struggle, fail, learn resilience, and develop their own competence, the parent steps in and completes the project for them.
The parent thinks they're protecting the child. They think they're nurturing them.
But protection has become possession. The parent is so anxious that they effectively eat the child's agency. They digest the child's opportunity to grow strong because the parent needs the immediate hit of relief that comes from securing an A on the project. The parent's present anxiety consumes the child's future resilience.
Love becomes appetite. The parent is feeding on the child's life to soothe their own emotional state. The essay is very careful to say that discipline, guidance, and fierce protection are vital. A parent is a gardener entrusted to cultivate life. But to devour a child is to consume the very resource you were entrusted to nourish.
It is the ultimate inversion of the natural biological norm. In a healthy generative continuity, mammalian biology dictates that the mother feeds the child from her own body. The parent sacrifices their own calories, their own time, their own energy to generate the future. Life flows outward and forward.
But in a collapsed, toxic corporate order, that fundamental flow of energy reverses. Instead of the parent giving life to the child, the parent extracts life from the child. The present eats the future. A righteous order protects its children. A corrupt order sacrifices them. But a collapsing order consumes them entirely.
And that profound inversion brings the entire architecture of the essay full circle. We started with the root word, the destruction of a generative continuity. What this final image reveals is that a death order doesn't necessarily need to be conquered by an outside army. By consuming its own seed, by eating its own future, a society enacts its own genocide. It destroys its own continuity from the inside out.
Let's pull all these threads together because the sheer scale of what we've covered today is staggering. The root supports the branch. The word inherently means the destruction of a generative body, a corporate continuity.
Biology showed us that immature continuity, like early-stage cancer cells, can still belong to a lethal trajectory, proving that some systems are inherently programmed to reproduce death regardless of their current size.
The military academic layer forced us to recognize that while humans have agency and can theoretically be separated from a death order, the ancient world simply lacked the bureaucratic, educational, and logistical infrastructure to perform that separation safely at scale.
Which brought us to the throughput principle. Immigration and global movement are essentially massive tests of societal metabolism. Input is not integration, and legal permission cannot magically override the hard physical limits of local infrastructure.
Because our human capacity is so deeply limited, we are blind gardeners. We cannot see the root. Therefore, only an omniscient God can righteously judge and completely uproot a corporate continuity, because only perfect knowledge guarantees that the trajectory was truly irredeemable. When humans try to do it, it is murder wearing stolen theology.
Leaving us with the stark warning that a society that fails to build life-generating infrastructure will eventually collapse inward, reversing the flow of life and consuming its own children to sustain its dying present.
The author distills this massive, complex architecture into two sharp guiding principles for how we view history. First, destroying poison is not the same as murdering the future. And second, pretending poison cannot regenerate is childish.
It's a profound call for systemic realism. We must judge the past by the capacity of the past. Ancient actions must be judged against the hard limits of ancient infrastructure. But crucially, modern actions must be judged against modern capacity.
And this is the grand overarching formula. The greater the capacity a society possesses to separate the person from the poison, the greater the moral obligation to do exactly that. We have more wealth, more communication tools, and more infrastructure than any civilization in human history.
Yeah, we really do.
Our obligation to offer mercy, to integrate, and to heal is correspondingly massive. The sin of the modern world isn't necessarily failing to destroy a death system. The sin is falsely labeling innocent human beings as poison simply because we're too lazy, too fractured, or too fearful to build the infrastructure required to integrate them.
Which leaves us staring into the future. Because if our moral obligation scales with our capacity, what happens in the next 50 years? We are currently moving at blinding speed into an era of artificial intelligence, real-time universal neural translation, and radical frictionless global digital integration.
We are building the ultimate communication infrastructure. We're actually building a planetary nervous system.
So the speculative, vital question becomes this. Will our modern infrastructure become so technologically advanced, so deeply capable of understanding and educating every individual, that no human being could ever again be considered inextricably tied to a hostile continuity?
Oh, wow.
Will AI and advanced logistics finally give us the capacity to perfectly separate the person from the poison every single time? Could we achieve a state of perfect global metabolism?
Or, and this is the dark side of that, is there a much darker alternative?
Yeah.
Will the sheer unbridled speed and overwhelming volume of global digital inflow eventually outpace even the most advanced technological infrastructure we can build? Could we construct a system so hyper-connected and so complex that it triggers a totally new kind of systemic collapse, a psychological and metabolic failure of the global body politic that our ancient ancestors couldn't have even imagined? Will the hardware of the human psyche just fry under the weight of the digital software we are forcing it to run?
That is the precipice we are standing on.
That is a staggering thought to end on. Look around at the institutions in your own world. Are they functioning as a healthy body that metabolizes and integrates? Or are they a collapsing order consuming the future? If you've been with us for this entire journey today, thank you. We have traveled from the linguistic roots of ancient destruction, through the biology of cellular rebellion, into the mechanics of societal metabolism, and finally, to the edge of our digital future. It all brings me back to that overgrown patch of land we started with. We spend so much of our time and energy arguing about the shape of the thorns, the color of the leaves, and the political surface of our problems. We hack away at the branches and congratulate ourselves. But maybe it's time we start paying much closer attention to the health, the trajectory, and the sheer metabolic reality of the invisible root network operating beneath our feet. Until next time, keep digging deep.